It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Thank you to everyone listening to us on Spreaker, at Secular Media Group, or on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, WPRR Grand Rapids. Hello, my name is Joe Elder.
I'm the leprechaun's pot of gold at the end of a double rainbow, Jeremiah Bannister.
How glorious is that?
It is always glorious.
And this is Paleo Radio. That's dude, how wonderful, man. Always throws me for a loop at the start. I love it.
Speaking of throwing somebody for a loop, Joe, I have to give a big shout-out, a huge bone thrown in the direction of Gregory Vining.
Oh, the man.
He's the man, hugely instrumental in assuring that we will have at our disposal a whole bunch of Paleo Radio Team Tiny Dancer shirts.
Yes, it's going to be fantastic. A big thank you to him, just instrumental in helping us get to Reason Rally and helping us get organized for it. So thank you, Gregory. But in the meantime, we have some great articles we're going to dive into, starting first going into some Israeli politics, where some people are warning of seeds of fascism developing there.
It's kind of weird to be talking about fascism in Israel, isn't it?
I think it's in the astrology of it.
It's
stars, bro.
Then we're going to follow up with Gary Johnson wants voters to know he's neither Trump nor Clinton, and that's why they should vote for him. It's by Tessa Stewart, an interview, actually, over at Rolling Stone.
And for the record, I just think it is great that people are at least talking to Gary Johnson at the level that they are. It's great news. Next, ISIS women and what they want, an article by Simon Coddy out of foreignpolicy.com.
Yeah, I got to throw this out there, man. Half of the article is totally behind a paywall.
Oh, yeah, let's be clear.
Thanks a lot, guys. We got
We've
totally
tried to give you a
enticed.
shout-out.
Yeah, we tried giving you a shout-out. Why don't you give us the rest of the article? But from what we read over at Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, there was a whole bunch there, super meaty. After that, we're going to be talking about a really controversial story. The NFL sought to influence head trauma study. This is by Yahoo Sports.
And there's some congressional weight to that, too, so that's going to be an interesting one to get into. But first, going to Israel. Shakeup in Israeli politics prompts, quote, seed of fascism warning. This is a Reuters article written by Luke Baker. A military affairs commentator interrupts his broadcast to deliver a monologue. I'm alarmed by what's happening in Israel, he says. I think my children should leave.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that's something.
Yeah, can you imagine that? That you're just in the middle of a monologue. You know, you're going through your whole broadcast. And your ordinarily scheduled broadcast, and all of a sudden, huge interruption, and the interruption is a monologue that's literally saying, I am terrified, I'm alarmed by what's happening, and I think that my kids, that they need to leave this place.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Wow. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak warns of the seeds of fascism. Moshe Aarons, who served as defense minister 3 times, sees it as a turning point in Israeli politics and expects it to cause political earthquakes.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah, this is huge. The past 5 days have produced tumult in Israeli politics since conservative Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unexpectedly turned his back on a deal to bring the center-left into his coalition and instead joined hands with the far-right nationalist Avigdor Lieberman, one of the most virulent critics of Benjamin Netanyahu's.
Aren't we seeing that all over the world, though, where you're
yes.
seeing the far-right rising?
You know, and this is entirely postulation on my point, but we're going to see more of this because as things get really turned up with global warming and mass migrations happen, we're going to see a lot more nationalism arising. It's just almost a natural result. Kind of scary, too, to be honest. Lieberman, a West Bank settler, wants to be defense minister. So on Friday, Netanyahu's former ally and confidant, Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon, resigned and quit Netanyahu's Likud party in disgust.
The defense minister.
So defense minister out, former prime minister saying This is causing political earthquakes.
And what is that? The second? I thought that defense minister was like the second highest position. It's something very big.
Yeah, it is. It's right
Obviously,
behind. It is second to the prime minister.
That's huge.
Oh, man, crazy. So after a weekend to digest the developments, which are expected to be finalized in an agreement between Netanyahu and Lieberman on Monday to form the most right-wing government in Israel's 68-year-old history, commentators have tried to put it in perspective and found themselves alarmed. Aarons, who has served as defense minister, foreign minister, and ambassador to the United States, is one of Netanyahu's early political mentors, and he said that this has far-reaching repercussions. Quote, Yalan's ouster is likely to be a turning point in Israeli political history. Political earthquakes are in the offing. It may take a little time, but it is coming. The law of unforeseen consequences is at work.
Especially because of the numbers now. Right? I mean, they have a good number of people in this coalition. What was it? They went from 61 to 67?
Yeah, so
out of 120.
It's a 120-member parliament. They go from 61 to 67 individuals, so they have the majority. And so this causes some serious turmoil in Israeli politics, particularly because this Lieberman fella, as I understand, is extremely right-wing. He's a West Bank settler. He's nationalist, so he's very interested in having no peace deals. And he's very interested in pushing Palestine further back.
I think somebody can be a nationalist and still push for peace deals. It depends on what kind of nationalism. And when you're saying this, I mean, here's how it goes. Pro-settlement. And when people need to understand what we mean by that. You know, what is meant by settlement. We're talking about people who say, hey, that's not my land over there yet, but I would really like to settle over there, and I believe it's my right. And that explanation ranges all the way from, you know, my right for whatever reason to my right for divine reasons or however it plays. And that they want to go in, take that house or that land from who it belongs to tear it down, to force eviction, sometimes with tanks and guns and everything else, protests, people chaining themselves, American protesters being killed, trying to help people who are being relocated.
Yes,
right.
relocated.
Families, yeah, you guys are being relocated, and now we're going to bulldoze your home. We're going to take your land. We're going to erect these beautiful homes that are meant specifically for Jews. Yes. And you cannot be there.
It's like a pushing of an invisible wall that's being pushed farther and farther and farther back, because one thing is just throwing a bone to it. If anyone has Netflix, which I'm assuming we all do because we're young, hip, cool cats, if you get on Netflix, World War II in color, the very last episode of it has pretty much the origins of Israel in post-World War II. And the very first thing that happens is Israel acquires a fleet, starts dropping some serious bombs into what they considered former Palestine, and they established an area that was theirs. And that practice kind of continues, and it's a practice that most people, or most Israelis in the far right wing, typically maybe you can find them in the Likud party of Netanyahu's, are in support of that idea and saying, look, there's a lot more Jews. The Jewish state of Israel is ours, and it is bigger than what we have at this point, and we need to be able to settle these lands and essentially push Palestinians off of it.
Well, and what's interesting is not only are they pushing their boundaries and their borders all the time with these settlements, but they're also separating the people who used the residents who used to live there, who had their stuff stolen. They're separating them even further from where they make their livelihood.
Yeah. From
farms, where they now have to go through all these different paths and walls and all these guards.
It's like Pac-Man.
It is.
Right? Moving all over the damn place.
You're moving all over the place, and then you finally get to your farm where the Israeli army is making sure to limit the amount of water you can use.
Let's think about it. Why in the world would well over 2 million people be packed into this tiny, tiny little strip in a certain area that is one of the most contested areas? Those are a lot of people who are displaced from their original homes not even a generation or two ago. I mean, it's a fact.
Yeah, and wary of peace negotiations. Yes. You know, tough on Palestinians. And you sit there and listen. Palestinians do plenty wrong. Oh, sure. I mean, listen, they're not snowflakes. You're like everybody. But you got to look at the situation and say, with the wrong that's being done, one has a sky dome.
Yes.
Yes, one has huge amounts of arsenal and equipment, huge amounts. And not only do they have huge amounts, but they get it from us.
Sure they do.
They get it from us. They get state-of-the-art stuff. Massive amounts of money. Massive amounts of weapons. A military.
Oh,
right?
Israel's a police state for sure.
Yes. And you say the other side, that they don't have that. They don't have the means for that. And you listen, we could go on forever with this stuff. I'll just say it. Israel's been a fascist state for a long time, and it's really weird after all these years of me and Joe saying things like this that now mainstream media is kind of picking up and going, "Oh my gosh, boy, this is," and we're talking mainstream media in Israel. This is right. These are Israeli writers. These are people in high positions of power in Israel, and they're saying it. Now our media is saying, well, it's kind of weird they're using this word fascism with it, and it seems like it's not just the Amy Goodman types of the world that are saying it anymore, or the Paleo Radio types of the world that are saying it anymore.
Yeah, without a doubt. Going back into Luke Baker's article, Lieberman's brand of politics, as we said, pro-settlement, wary of peace negotiations, tough on Palestinians, it sits far more comfortably with Netanyahu and his right-wing partners than the center-left does, which is obvious. But the big point is here. It means there's no countervailing voice in the government, and the person in charge of defense, the most important portfolio in Israel after the prime minister, is a civilian with little military experience.
You know, it reminded me, I know this is way off topic, but it reminded me of Buddy Slice homeboy to Governor McGreevey, his lover, and that was appointed to a position for Homeland Security. He didn't have qualifications at all. That was entirely about an affair, right? And I remember walking in with the guy that I worked for as a chief aide. He was a lobbyist, New Jersey League of American Families. And we walk in and he talks about that and how dangerous of a situation that actually was. Yes. You know, and then to have the whole thing blow up in a scandal and he ends up going back to Israel, interestingly enough. Okay, and so, I mean, this has happened before, putting people for reasons that are not very good in positions of great authority, dangerous.
And now as we start stirring the pot, there's also just the military aspect to it. At a time when the command of Israel Defense Forces is already at odds with the government over policies it feels are too hard line, Lieberman's appointment risks creating more tension between the political leadership and the military. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are on edge too. Quote, what has happened is a hostile takeover of the Israeli government by dangerous elements. This is Ehud Barak again, Israel's most decorated soldier and a former defense minister, following his spell as head of government. Israel has been infected with the seeds of fascism, he said, adding to what should be, quote, a red light for all of us regarding what's going on in government.
Right, terrifying.
So you have one of the most decorated soldiers in the Israeli government, and who was previously one of the heads of state, who says this is a huge problem.
Yeah, he's a big name. Ehud Barak is a big name. And for him to come out and say those kind of things, and listen, I think that this is a well-measured approach to this, the way that they describe it. It's not like, well, I mean, look, it's kind of the Jews calling fellow Jews Hitler kind of thing. You know, everybody is Hitler, even apparently now in Israel. It's not that. You got somebody saying very qualified, very reserved things like infected by the seeds of fascism, that it would take a long time, that it's inevitable because of this idea of unforeseen consequences, that kind of thing is just going to happen. I think that is a very reserved and prudent way of expressing a very deep fear of something you never would have imagined would be in Israel.
Sure, we're going to see a lot more to this. Netanyahu has held power for more than 10 years, spread over 4 terms. In that time, politics has moved steadily to the right, with his coalition now hinging on support from Orthodox religious and ultra-nationalist parties.
We'll be right back, friends, right after this to talk about the Libertarian Party and Gary Johnson.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
We've had some hot Twitter action as of late, JB.
I know, it's getting me all verklempt.
All verklempt like Mike Myers on Saturday Night Live. Oh, man, we have a great follower here, someone that we've been following and we talked to and are affiliated with.
Yeah.
Dogma Debate.
Dogma Debate with David Smalley. We're working our way up in the ranks, it seems.
Yes, he's a fine young gentleman, and we look forward to seeing him and another special person at Reason Rally.
We're going to see Jenica Krail. She also followed us at Paleo Radio Show on Twitter. And listen, if you're not following us, you're out of your damn mind. That's right. It's awesome.
That's where all the fun is happening. Jenica is an atheist humanist activist, media relations director at Dogma Debate, and blogger at Real Life Beyond Faith.
A fantastic person. And listen, if you like what she does on Twitter, make sure to go check her out on Facebook. She has a great feed. It's awesome. She's a fantastic person. Same thing with Brandy Madden and same thing with David Smalley, both from Dogma Debate.
Love you bunches.
Love you tons. So, okay, we're going to get into this one here. This is a bunch of fun, Joe. This has to do with the old Libertarian Party.
And still, as always, can't help it, but in a way, and in effect, it has to do with old DT.
Well, it does have to do with old DT in a way. You can't ever get him out of it, can you?
No.
I mean, he's like somehow he's always part of the conversation.
He's like gluten. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. So Gary Johnson wants voters to know he's neither Trump nor Clinton. And that's why they should vote for him. And actually at the top it says Libertarian nominee on the Koch brothers and being a Trump alternative. It's by Tessa Stewart at Rolling Stone. And it's an interview, Joe. So there's going to be quotes in here that we just take right out of there and we can talk about what he said.
Yeah. And people, please get wise to Gary Johnson. Again, we said it in the intro, but man, he like everybody, you know, I always run on kind of the 80-20 rule or 75-25. You're going to have things you disagree with the person, but you should hear him out. He's got some great insights on quite a few things, as well as he's got some, you know, dark spots.
The day Ted Cruz dropped out of the Republican primary, Google searches for Gary Johnson went through the roof. Johnson, the pro-pot former Republican governor of New Mexico, took home 1% of the nationwide vote as the Libertarian candidate for president in 2012. This year, he thinks his chances are much better.
Yeah,
it can't get much worse. I mean, listen, I like Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein in the Green Party in 2012. I think she got like 1/3 of 1%. I mean, that's a realistic figure for what's going on here, but he got 1% of the vote. And listen, I know a lot of my Libertarian friends, whenever they talk about Gary Johnson, they always inflate it. You know, and I like Gary Johnson, but it's always, oh, no, man, I think it was closer to 7 or 8. And you're like, oh, no, not even close.
Don't even play that game.
But that's what makes this so much better.
Yeah, there's some facts behind this rise of Gary Johnson, which is really interesting. We're seeing some numbers and people looking for him. You know, his hits online have just gone through the roof.
On Thursday, Johnson, still the presumptive nominee until the Libertarian Party convention in Florida next weekend, announced William Weld, former Republican governor of Massachusetts, as his VP pick. And, I mean, listen, how smart is that? And I'm not a fanboy of Johnson. Listen, Johnson and I have a lot of disagreements. There's a reason I didn't vote for him in 2012 and why I preferred Jill Stein. You know, but from just a campaign perspective, the idea that you have a former governor of New Mexico and then you've got a former governor of Massachusetts, and so now you've got 2 governors. Right, in places that would be great to win.
Sure, with widely different views than what people would think of as establishment.
Right, but yet they still know how the game is played.
And still play the game.
Right, and he does, and he takes heat for it. I saw it. Could 2 Republican governors set to be on the ballot in all 50 states be the white horse never Trumpers have been praying for? Maybe not. A recent Fox News poll has Johnson at just 10%. Not enough even to get into the general election debates. And that is a huge deal.
It is. And to me, I think it's honestly wrong. If somebody's polling at, say somebody's polling at 1%, like, for instance, look at our chances with a guy like Martin O'Malley. If they went by this ruling, he should have had no business being on the stage in the first place. Most people will say that, but at least give him a chance to put his point of view out there. And if people don't rise to it and don't jive to it, he'll be gone anyway. But the opportunity to be there, I think, is kind of deviant, the way the Democratic and Republican Party work the system, so any third party has to hit at least 15 without having any debates.
Yeah, the debate commission's what, made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans?
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that quaint? Convenient.
Not even necessarily federally affiliated. It's a business, as I presume.
And so they're just making sure that everything's going according to plan, and it's at least a 50-50 coin flip. You'd hate to have other opinions and ideas in there. And so, but listen, I interviewed Jill Stein back in 2012. Actually, I didn't interview Jill Stein. There's a story with that, but I won't go through it. I interviewed Honkala, her VP choice. The day after, they attempted to get into one of the debates in New York City, and they were arrested. And they were put into this crazy factory, right? It was a wild story, and they come out in the middle of the night. You know, they let them go outside this factory in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was like a port area. And they let them out at like 3 in the morning
like
and said,
cattle.
there you go, see ya. And, you know, they said it was terrifying. They were terrified. That's because they tried to get into the debate. Yes. Nader's done it. Buchanan's done it. Where they said, we want to go in. And I mean, you're talking people, Nader, he had bigger numbers than Johnson. Now, Ross Perot was able to get into these national debates, but there was at one point where he was in polls, he was like 39%.
Yeah, he was leading at
one point.
I think he finished 17 to 20, something like that. 18,
like that.
19.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing somewhere up there, but yeah, he was almost 20%.
And so he was able to get into the debates, but it's looking like a good possibility. And listen, I've got my fingers crossed for this. I'm not even the hugest Gary Johnson fan. I honestly, I'm going to be frank, I haven't gone to his campaign website this year. Not one time. Yeah. I haven't.
Me neither.
I know stuff about him already. That's part of the reason why. But just the idea of having a third party on the stage as an alternative, that would be, it was iconic the last time it happened. It was iconic. I remember it's when I first got into politics, and I was drawing political cartoons when Ross Perot was running and all of that. And it was a powerful time in America to be able to at least say, here's an independent thought that's not tied and tethered to one of these two parties, these Republicrats. Yes. And that's something profound. And you can see, listen, you can see a direct line from what was going on with Ross Perot and what's going on now in this country. You can see a direct line from the issues that are prominent, the issues that are big, the kind of things that are going on. But this time, it's made its way into one of the two main parties, and it's making way because of discontent. It's making space for people who would be third-party candidates. I don't know if Jill Stein's ever going to be able to get that number.
I don't know if even if they got to 15%, if they wouldn't be some wheeling and dealing to make sure they just didn't get in there. Because I mean, we know what parties do to each other to be able to kind of shaft different candidates out of presidential elections. We're seeing it happen in the DNC. I'm not saying Bernie Sanders did not lose or is not losing, by the way, because he's getting shafted so much as he's just getting beat. The out-and-out polling is showing it. I know people will be mad at me for that, but we could even add almost 100,000 votes for Bernie Sanders. He still wouldn't be close. She's beaten him by millions in the popular vote.
Now, I've heard that contested.
Yeah, we have.
Because of the number, how they calculate it. Well, how they calculate caucus numbers. Yes. Yeah, but either way, she's winning, and she's bold enough right now to be having come out just a couple days ago and very flatly saying, "There's no way I won't get this." Like this is already mathematically locked up.
And not to completely continue at this, but Bernie Sanders is right to say that most of those superdelegates pledged to Hillary Clinton before there was even another person in competition with her, and those superdelegates do get to change their mind. We don't know what they say. Everyone keeps saying it's all Clinton, but that's kind of something you can hinge your bets on, is that superdelegate voters may not necessarily still be all for Clinton.
Yeah, you have campaign manager Jeff Weaver coming out furious at Chris Matthews for saying that on a certain day they're going to call it and that they're going to say that she's the presumptive nominee. And not only will MSNBC do it at this time, 8 o'clock, but it will also be other places. And Weaver's just shaking his head no and saying you can change votes of superdelegates. That's the whole idea. They at least have to vote, so let's make our appeal to it. So anyway, back to the story. The only chance a third party has of winning the presidency, and this is a quote from Johnson, and it's kind of dovetailing what we were saying. The only chance a third party has of winning the presidency is to be in the presidential debate. And right now, that possibility is very, very real. And it starts with Hillary and Trump being arguably the two most polarizing figures in American politics today. Why even say today?
Yeah, period, historically.
Right.
And more people get polled now. I mean, it's it is just by the numbers across the board, a wider breadth of people that get surveyed about these things. And yeah, it's the highest ever for both of them.
And this kind of gives some credibility, I guess, to the conspiratorial idea that Trump is in there in order to make it possible for Hillary to be elected, because Hillary's unapproval ratings are so huge that compared to him, I mean, they would be historical. They would be number one in the bad department if it weren't for the existence of Trump in there.
I think that would have been true if we didn't know that the previous Republican presidential candidate had no interest in even running against her. And they had all what they thought was ammo, but they did a lot of canvassing and they did a lot of diving in and paying for a lot of polls that show that Mitt Romney would even know he would have gotten torched by her. So, I mean, in the state that the Republican Party was in, I would say that I think she could have won outright against anybody that would have been running, whether Trump was in there or not.
That it actually makes it harder.
It makes it harder.
Right.
He does, because he's just got different viewpoints. For instance, just like we talk about this off air all the time, you and I, we like to go back and forth with Donald Trump about tariffs and his economic policies. That's so much different than Republicans. They're not talking about going to like Bull and Moose Party tariffs. They don't really have a proposition other than saying they don't like what's happening. But Trump has one.
And turns out that the people, the Republicans, and this is a new thing, that it's not that independents and Democrats are making their way over in droves, but it's that formerly inactive primary voters in the GOP are now active. Yeah. That the people who would normally just wait till the general are going now, and they're voting in the primary in larger numbers out of excitement and enthusiasm for Donald Trump. But that kind of plays into the whole idea that this is now a reflection of what's actually in the party.
Yeah, and it's a great time for a guy like Gary Johnson to be capitalizing in this, where the Republican Party has different ideals being cast into it. Democrats have someone who's notoriously disliked according to national surveys, and then you have Gary Johnson who's got a fresh idea, and he's neither of those two by quite a stretch.
And he's definitely much different when it comes to drugs.
For sure.
When it comes to the drug war, when it comes to criminal justice, dramatically different. When it comes to free trade, dramatically different. When it comes to immigration issues, dramatically different. You know, and so he provides an alternative in a lot of different ways, but a lot of these cruise crew guys would have to buy into the idea of legalized marijuana.
Yes.
And that's just not something they're going to do.
No, but he says some very interesting things in terms of marijuana and legalization of cannabis. Gary Johnson says, "I've always advocated for the legalization of marijuana. I think it makes the world a better place. On the medicinal side, marijuana products directly compete with legal prescription drugs, painkillers, antidepressants that statistically kill 100,000 people a year. Meanwhile, there have been no known deaths from marijuana." Which,
right.
This is Gary Johnson, presidential candidate's words.
And he talks a lot about this. I mean, he stepped down as the CEO. He had a company called Cannabis Sativa Incorporated. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about what that's all about. But he had to step down from that, and he talks a lot about this because it's a big thing in his life. But he's also against super PACs. You know, he's against the idea that they're not transparent. He said currently it's not. He said there's no control. You don't even have knowledge of who they are or what they're doing. But was something that he said that it would be really terrible if we didn't mention this, because this is really true. When talking about getting to that 15% number and how important that is to get into the debates, you have to be in the polls. You have to actually be part of the questions that are being asked in order to even register as any percentile whatsoever. And so that is a real difficult thing, and I think there's a lawsuit going on right now.
That's right. Please check it out. Rolling Stone Libertarian nominee, Gary Johnson, fantastic article. Next, what ISIS women want.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
I got a reminder on Facebook, Joe, to blast the shofar.
Oh, yeah?
It's true, man. I have to blast it loud and clear for everybody. Patreon.com/Paleo Radio is how we do everything here.
Indeed, it is how we do everything. It's how we're able to cover the articles and different topics that we like to cover and you like to hear without being bogged down or dispersed by advertisers.
And it's how we feed ourselves.
It is absolutely how we feed our fat faces.
So make sure, go check us out, patreon.com/Paleo Radio.
Okay. Foreignpolicy.com, What ISIS Women Want. This is by Simon Coddy. Western women who join the Islamic State aren't victims who've been groomed or seduced by men. They're committed jihadis in their own right. This is a very interesting article. Again, like we said, this is kind of a pay-for-play payola article, so we did not get the entire one, but there's a lot of good meat in it, so we wanted to continue to use it.
It was enough for us to have some fun.
Oh, without a doubt.
And to learn some stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, which is always great, because we were going to learn some things. Okay. What do Western women who join the Islamic State want? One prominent theory is that these women really want to get laid. That's interesting. Another is that they don't know what they really want because what they really want has been decided for them by a male jihadi groomer. Both theories are meant to resolve a seeming paradox. How can any women who enjoy democratic rights and equality before the law join and support a group which actively promotes her own oppression? But both are misconceived.
Yeah, that's why I call it the ghost of George W. Bush's argument. Because obviously they only hate us because we're so freaking free.
Yes, because of our freedoms. No, that's a great point. It is. It's the idea of they hate us because we're free.
Are these really the two prominent theories right now?
I don't know.
I don't know if that's really true.
I would hope that, I'm not saying that all the money in the world should be going to this, but there's got to be some social psychologists or some behavioral psychologists that are pretty interested in how this happens. I just want to break it down.
Is it really just about, how is it that they're enjoying themselves so much and they just go into... that's kind of magical thinking almost.
It is. And Simon Cotty says that it has more to do with gender assumptions and the people who prefer those gender assumptions than the women that are trying to explain why they did it. So he continues in the article. The idea that Western Islamic State fangirls, as they're often derogatively called, just want to have fun is the thesis of, among others, Shazia Mirza, a British comedian whose latest show is called The Kardashians Made Me Do It. The show's title references a comment made by one of the sisters of the 3 East London schoolgirls who absconded to Syria in February of 2015. Quote, "She used to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians and stuff like that, so there was nothing that indicated that she was radicalized in any way, not at home."
Let me jump in, man.
You do.
I got to say this. When I read that, I thought, and I said, I don't know about this. It's anecdotal, but I used to intern at an Assemblies of God in Garland, Texas. And when I was down there, we had a convenience store not far from the church, and I'd always go there to buy my stuff every day. And there was a Muslim guy owned the place, and we got into a conversation about modesty. Right, and why women wear burqas, or why would you do that? And he was very passionate about it, and he was very heartfelt about it, about his beliefs regarding just how corrupt the United States had become with its nudity, with its lewdness. And he would describe it, and he would describe things like, listen, the Kardashians, that's kind of, that would be, if you asked him, would you say the Kardashians qualify in that? It would just be, it's a given. So to him, that was really an important thing. I can imagine people, given the right circumstances, the context surrounding them, being radicalized, maybe watching the Kardashians.
And in a way of disgust, you mean?
Right.
Like people seeing that, which is kind of opposite of what Mirza's saying, but I agree with that. Mirza's basically saying, well, she watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians, so, it's not like she was radicalized. And very well could be that seeing shows like that could be an element of disgust. Everyone has their theories. Mine is, I don't really know if it has much to do with men or women so much as it has to do with the fervor of being a young teen. But most teens are, whatever their identity is or whatever identity they've clung to, I'll say for the time being because most of us don't stay that person, but whatever identity they've clung to, they're that person hardcore. If you have the 18 to 20-year-old goth kid, they are usually I'm all out. I'm all out Star Wars guy. I'm not trying to be so derogatory. I'm only saying it to be like it's owning the identity of the person. I'm just, when I was 18, I was the young jock, hardcore Christian guy. That was my thing, my identities, and I was very extreme, more extreme than my parents about my views of Christianity and the rules and how we need to abide by them. So it's not too far of a stretch for me to assume that someone who's around this age can take to, if their identity is religion, take to that in a fervor that's very, very strong, especially for the time frame of their life.
And you can see it not only religiously, but also politically.
Without a doubt.
You can say, look at the statistics regarding how young people are voting in this election compared to how older people are voting in this election. That's one of the main things people talk about when discussing the difference between Bernie and Hillary, the supporters that they have, is that the young people are fervent in that way. Listen, the argument, if you believe them, is that they're the true blue hardcore progressives. That's taking it to an extreme in politics. I'm not saying an extreme there is bad, right? I'm not making that claim in this argument here, or what I'm trying to say. Simply that on the spectrum, that's further left than not.
Sure.
And so the same thing, like with what you were saying, whatever somebody is into in that age, it's a tendency anyway right now for them to just crank it up to 11.
It really always has been. The youth are the ones that have the most fervor in whatever they're believing in. And that's, and I'm not trying to say that those beliefs aren't true blue, because they do truly believe that. I think over time we adapt and we kind of become a little bit more practical, and that's just kind of the nature of growing up. But going back into the article, Mirza's overall argument is that the Islamic State for teens like Begum, which is one of the girls that left to go to Syria, is just another teenage crush. Indeed, the Islamic State, she suggests, is like a boy band, only with guns.
Yeah, the ISIS is a boy band with guns theory.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. And, I mean, listen, there's something to it, man. You've got the angel of death floating around on social media, Abu Azrael.
Yes, that's true.
Seriously. And, listen, if
He's
you
this
don't...
jacked, Rambo-looking dude.
Super jacked
Very
Rambo.
good-looking man. And he's just armed to the teeth and got swords and guns and rockets and...
Actually, right here, you've got it, the Daily Mail. Just you can check it out on your own. We will cut you like shawarma. Gruesome video shows Angel of Death, Iraqi fighter, carving flesh off charred body of an ISIS fighter he burned to death. And this dude literally...
Wow.
The pictures of him are like model quality pictures.
So
They are. It's part of the propaganda.
It's a part
It
of
is.
it, yes.
And if this guy's real, he is the most hardcore. He makes Shamgar look like a wuss. And if you don't know who Shamgar is, check that dude out because he makes Samson look like easy peasy.
That's fantastic.
It's true.
I think that there is some truth to that, but I think the overall reason it's got to have more to do with connections in terms of relationships. I'd have to investigate this myself because I don't know if it's 100%, but I know it's very high in the number of incidences that are happening with terrorism in the United States recently, like the shooting up of the military recruitment center, the shooting at the Muhammad drawing in Texas, and San Bernardino shootings. These are all people that were from the United States that became radicalized, and in many, many cases, they still had contact and were exchanging information, like not information, but exchanging messages and talking frequently and visiting people outside the United States. And it's not to say that we can't do that, but if you put yourself into the mind of that person, maybe there's some guilt there in the sense of they know how they live here in the United States and they know how people that are living over there, what they think of the people that are in the United States. And I think it kind of blends your view of what America is. And this, maybe I'm being George Bush right now, to be honest. Maybe I'm saying the hate of us our freedoms. I don't think it's generally, hey, they're more free and that's why we don't like them. It's maybe being pitched to them the idea of you're getting these privileges because of the way you stomp around on other people like us. And I think that becomes a way where it's a fertile ground for people to become radicalized.
I think so, too. And I was thinking back, actually, when we were kind of going over the notes and stuff with this, I was thinking back to someone I knew back in, I think it was 7th grade, and went over to Fiji, the islands, and went on a missionary trip, right, a missions trip. And when she came back, there was a report, and it was in front of the whole class, and it got very emotional, and she had an appeal that very self-reflective, right, very deep, very passionate, but was saying how much we take for granted here in the United States and how we need to make huge changes and that the life was changed forever and everyone else should be as well. And I wondered, and I said, I know this person. I know how this person has lived the rest of her life so far. I know this. I'm not being a jerk. But to say this is something that happened, but this person has blonde hair, blue eyes, white person, from a culture that, and from a home that was making enough money to send her to a private school.
Fiji.
And to send her to Fiji,
Sure.
right, and all of this. And so coming back, you aren't part of a cultural set of people that are always looked on with suspicion.
Yes. Well, I think it's a great point because just as you're saying right now, you kind of noticed right off the bat her rhetoric about things here in the States and how they should be changed. And again, I'm not trying to say that taking a trip to Fiji to help somebody out is a bad idea and come back to the U.S. and asking for change is a bad idea. It's only to say that if we're talking about things like psychology, that could perhaps be an open door to some rhetoric that could be damaging in different ways. In some ways, it could be very positive. Coming back and saying we need to donate more to third world countries so we can help them build more infrastructure or something like that. Yes. Coming back and saying you only get this because of the way you're acting in other countries, that's dangerous.
So the writer disagrees with Mirza at one point and says, this isn't serious. As a commentary, it's funny, but not really serious. But what did Mirza say? And here's the quote. But these ISIS men, as barbaric as they are, you have to admit, they are hot. They're macho. They're hairy. They've got guns. And these girls think these are a bit of all right. What they've done is sold their mother's jewelry and bought a one-way ticket to Syria for some halal meat. They're not religious. they're horny. And I said, there's kind of some credibility to this. I mean, we live in the day and age, and if people don't believe me, you got to go check it out. There is a gorilla named Shabani that Japanese girls are completely bonkers over.
This is a real thing.
A real thing. You got to check it out. Not interested in sex or anything like that, but man, they're there every day taking the pictures for Instagram of Shabani.
And screaming like it's like they're watching the Beatles play.
Yeah, totally freaking out, crying. It's nuts.
Yeah, that is, it is something to it. And again, I'm not trying to give precedence to it. Like, what's the percentage of girls that went because they thought that ISIS was hot? I have no idea. I don't know. It's very high, but hey, stranger things have happened, I guess I would say.
You just got to watch CNN.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Kadi also refutes the second argument, which is that these women are being groomed, saying that's a gendered reading of radicalization, noting that young men also are not being groomed by charismatic young women, and he's saying it's a bit patriarchal.
And with media theory and propaganda, is it so much the power of the person manipulating the propaganda, or the fact that the person that they're trying to groom is already groomed by their circumstances?
Yeah. You know what? Maybe it's none of these things. Maybe it's a little bit of all of these things. We'll find out with more data, as always.
We'll be right back. Right after this, we're going to be talking about a study that the NFL tried to manipulate a little bit.
Has to do with the head.
We'll be back.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact Paleo Radio Show at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
There's a super-duper fantastic new show on Secular Media Group, which is hosted by Jerry DeWitt and our very good friend Bobby C., called Hope After Faith. What do you think about that, Jeremiah?
It's got me so jazzed, bro, that my jazz hands have been liquid dancing for the last 15 seconds. It's totally amazing. I'm pumped.
We've been jazz handsing just ever since we've heard of this. It's just uncontrollable.
And hey, listen, a good trivia question for all of our freaks and geeks. When you go and listen to the show, listen to the intermission and find out if you can recognize the voice. I can promise you will.
Oh, what a little hint. But yes.
I promise.
Congratulations to you guys. It's going to be a very, very interesting show. They're going to talk about people's walk basically out of faith and kind of give their testimonial about what it was like to grow up in religious households and leave the faith and what their life is like now, what they think life means basically. So really interesting show, going to be a lot of great content, and we're excited for it.
Speaking of being super excited, I'm pumped up to talk about this topic, Joe. NFL tried to influence concussion research, congressional study finds. This is by John Branch over at the New York Times. We're actually going to be sourcing a couple different places on this one. When the NFL agreed in 2012 to donate tens of millions of dollars to concussion research overseen by the National Institutes of Health, it was widely seen as a positive turning point in football's long history of playing down the long-term effects of brain injuries on players. At the time, the league said that it would have no influence over how the money was used. And hey, doesn't that seem like a legit thing?
Well, that's quite a vote of confidence, isn't it?
Right. To say, hey, we're going to be putting in a lot of money on this, and I know it's controversial, but we're not going to try to influence it anyway. But according to a study that was conducted by a congressional committee and released on Monday, the league and its head, neck, and spine committee worked to improperly influence the government research, trying to steer the study toward a doctor with ties to the league.
Oh, well, how interesting is that? That's kind of like Coke doing a study on sugar and saying, well, we want to donate this money, but we're really interested in having our scientists at Coke handle the study as well, if that's okay. But you guys can publish it.
Yeah, it's so convenient, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so the NFL had agreed to donate $30 million to the National Institute of Health to fund brain research, but has now backed out after the institutes went ahead and went with $16 million in grant money to a prominent Boston University researcher, Robert Stern.
Yeah, and we're going to learn a lot about this guy.
Oh, we are.
So the congressional report says this. It says, quote, "Our investigation has shown that while the NFL had been publicly proclaiming its role as funder and accelerator of important research, it was privately attempting to influence that research. The NFL attempted to use its unrestricted gift as leverage to steer funding away from one of its critics." Now listen, unrestricted gift. In the quotations there, right?
Yeah.
Like saying, hey, listen, there's no restrictions on this. We're doling this out. We're part of the whole thing. We really are interested in the truth. And then you find out, maybe not so much, because sometimes truth literally hurts.
Oh yeah, and this is an old tactic. This is a very, very old tactic of, hey, I'm just going to scratch your back, and I'm going to do it for nothing. But, oh, wait, turns around, and, man, now I need my back scratched, and don't you remember what I did for you? I mean, they're basically doing kind of the carrot and the stick thing with the NIH and saying, well, if you want this money, you're going to have to play some ball. So, kudos to them for standing up to it and just basically outing this whole story and letting that slip out and say, look, they're trying to manipulate the studies.
Right, that there's things, right, that they're trying to manipulate it. And that, listen, that's kind of behind the curtain stuff, all of this.
Oh, yeah.
About this. Because otherwise, what would happen is that you could possibly see a bunch of numbers and figures thrown out there about it that you're like, boy, those look really official. Those things look like they're being honest and transparent. Look, they're putting numbers up there. But if you have somebody that's your guy, right, that you bring in from the side, hey, Chaz, bring in our rep, this dirty scoundrel that we've had for a long time, and have this guy with questionable credentials. I mean, that's any time. I mean, it's like the goat milk guy.
Oh, yeah.
The arthritic goat milk guy.
The cure cancer goat milk fellow.
Right. I mean, just that kind of thing. So if you have to bring in somebody conveniently, hey, why don't you consider our dude? He's excellent. He's always come up with stuff that confirms what we want. And that kind of a guy, then just from the get-go, there's huge problems.
Sure. And this was a boardroom deal where the NFL sat around and said, look, if we do our own study, people are going to say we're biased, which we obviously are. So what we need to do is we need to channel money through an entity that is extremely respected, and through influence of the money that we've donated, this is how we're going to get the results we want that's from a firm that's more respected or viewed as less biased than just the NFL. So they're playing a game. It's a political game. Now, I don't know if it's really the right game to play. I think they are doing it not necessarily just for the NFL, but because of the whole infrastructure of football to begin with. There's a lot of people that have kids start out even earlier playing football. I was a football player. I played since 7th grade on until I was a senior. But I think that the big worry is not the people who are going to play for $1 million that have this. The big worry is people who get CTE in high school or college.
I had a friend who had so many concussions playing high school football that they told him he couldn't play anymore.
I know a few people like that myself.
And he's a great guy. He's done wonderful professional things. He wrote a piece for the Battle Creek Enquirer, the newspaper from Africa, I believe. He's done amazing things in his life. But, that's something that's on his radar.
Yeah.
And he only played through, I think, his senior year in high school. I think that was just it.
Yeah. And, I mean, we've all had our moments. Every player, I mean, I've had times where I've been cracked hard enough to assume that I had a concussion. I know I had the symptoms of it, and I was, just starry-eyed even after the play, and it's 3 plays later and still feeling like I have clouds in your head and stuff like that. And I'm one of many who had that experience. I mean, almost when high school football is a type of sport where now people look at the NFL and they go, well, they're not cracking heads like that, and you're right. But if you stand on the sideline of a competitive high school football game, you're going to hear pads popping and helmets hitting. I mean, it's loud. It happens.
One of the draws for people to go is that literally you hear the plastic bashing up against each other and that sound of hitting into the pads, right? And hearing the shoulder pads rustle. That's all part of the mystique of football.
I think the NFL is playing kind of a real funny game, probably the same one boxing would if they had such a young youth effort that was so strong. But, I mean, the NFL could, I honestly think, get away with saying, yes, this causes injuries, and yes, this is what people want to do. The NFL is not having a hard time recruiting people to want to play for the NFL. And people know, I mean, it's not like we don't know that you get hurt permanently by playing professional sports. We can see a lot of our heroes who just withered away just after they left the sport, So it's a thing of, we know boxers get hurt by boxing. NFL players know they get hurt when they're in the NFL, and if the National Football League were just to accept that, not condone it, but say this is a fact of the sport, and we license it as such, I don't think they would really lose that much of a viewership. I think people pretty much know that everyone else gets jacked up, and they don't care that much.
It's a big gamble.
But it has to do with, if they acknowledge, then they have to pay out for players afterwards, which the NFL is notorious for not wanting to do.
Yeah, they don't want to do that at all. And, hey, there's a lot of details. This study was 91 pages, Joe.
Oh, yeah, it's lengthy.
It's lengthy, right? It's a 91-page study, and it said that the NFL had funded the first 4 research projects by the NIH, but that it made an issue over a proposed 5th. And here's what happened. The NIH recommended a study to characterize, and I'm going to try to pronounce, I struggled with this one in read-through, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. I'm trying.
That's good.
Listen, this is a tough one. You got to look it up for yourselves, everybody. In high-risk adults over the course of 3 to 5 years, CTE, a degenerative brain disease, is caused by repeated blows to the head. For now, it can only be diagnosed posthumously and has been discovered in roughly 100 deceased former NFL players.
That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
I mean, that's a big enough one to see at least some sort of correlation there.
Where you start to say, hey, and doesn't it kind of make some sense? I mean, wouldn't that even just you say, hey, I mean, we know that having sharp blows to the head, repeated ones, that the likelihood that you're going to end up having a concussion is dramatically higher.
It absolutely is. I mean, without a doubt, we know that these repeated blows to the head are going to have a high risk. There's a guy named Junior Seau, who's an all-pro outside linebacker for the San Diego Chargers for, well over a decade. He retires. He's a analyst. He's covering games. He's still involved. What most people thought was happy-and-go-lucky. And Junior Seau takes his own life, but does so in a way that preserves his brain, so he doesn't shoot himself. He did, I believe, he shot himself in the heart.
Right, yeah.
And his message was that he wanted his brain to be studied because he knew something was just not right. And it turns out he, too, was somebody with CTE.
And he's not the only one.
And he's multiple.
Multiple ones.
Over 100 people diagnosed.
Right. That's bad news. And especially when it's gotten so bad that people who are, all-star athletes, people who are the best in the league in their position, that those people, Hall of Famer types, right?
Yes.
That once they're out, that it's still kind of ignored or denied or lobbied against and all of this. And it gets to the point where someone like that and others like that are taking their own lives and doing it in a way it's dramatic, to shoot themselves in their heart in order to allow people to investigate their brain because this was a problem that they believe they had that was being suppressed.
Well, and also we have the player Antoine Randall, who's a former NFL wideout. He played football for the University of Indiana, and he also was a baseball player, and he regrets ever playing football. Said he regularly experiences trouble walking down the stairs. Quote, I have to come down sideways sometimes depending on the day, and he has serious memory lapses. I ask my wife things over and over again, and she's like, I just told you that. I'll ask her 3 times the night before and get up in the morning and still forget, stuff like that. I try to chalk it up to I'm busy, I'm doing a lot, but I have to be on my knees praying about it, he says, asking God not to have these issues and live a long life. I want to see my kids raised up. I want to see my grandkids. And I know I'm going to be the crass person to say it, but that's just not how reality works. Is the damage is seriously done. Randall is not going to get out of the body that is smashed and broken up.
Yeah, that's a price tag.
Sure.
Right? Football has a price tag, and that's what's being debated right now. And people are trying to figure out, well, how big is the tag? How dangerous? Right? How dangerous? And listen, I encourage people, they should just go and check everything out in this article. It's an excellent piece. Actually, there's 2 of them that we relied on. I know that I was relying on the one by John Branch over at the New York Times, but what was the one from Yahoo Sports, Joe?
The other article was by Jay Busby in Yahoo Sports. He says, and this is a great little clip that he got into, whether it's from the fallout of Ray Rice's domestic abuse saga, ongoing controversy over Washington's team name, or the vets at NFL games, the league's actions and inactions continue to draw federal scrutiny.
So much to talk about, but dude, we're completely out of time.
It always ends so fast.
It does. It ends, we're like, we got to a great point. Oh, we're so sorry. Go read the article, folks.
Exactly right. Hey, this next Thursday, June 2nd, I am going to be at Dr. Grin's at the Bob here in Grand Rapids doing a 5-minute comedy set. If you're around, please check it out.
And remember, this is our last show before Reason Rally, so you're going to miss out on us, but we hope to see you there, and if we do, huge honking hugs.
Get your butt to D.C. We will see you there. Enjoy the week off. Catch you guys on the flip side.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.